On the 12th of August 1935, the body of a young Welsh journalist was discovered in one of the most remote regions of Inner Mongolia. He had been kidnapped several days earlier while travelling through territory controlled by competing warlords and bandit groups. And when his body was finally found, he had been shot 3 times. Officially, his death was blamed on local bandits. Yet almost from the moment the news reached Europe, many people suspected that there was more to the story. After all, this was not just any journalist. 2 years earlier, he had publicly exposed one of the Soviet Union's darkest secrets. And in doing so, he had humiliated Joseph Stalin on the world stage. His name was Gareth Jones. Today, he is remembered as one of the first Western journalists to reveal the truth about famine that was devastating Soviet Ukraine. But at the time, his warnings were dismissed, denied and attacked by many people who simply did not want to believe what he had seen. Gareth Jones was born in Barry, South Wales in 1905. From a young age, he showed an extraordinary talent for languages and international affairs, eventually studying at Cambridge before becoming an advisor to former British Prime Minister David Lloyd George. Unlike many journalists of his era, Jones was not content to simply report events from government offices or hotel rooms. He wanted to see things for himself, and that desire would take him to some of the most dangerous places in the world. In 1933, he travelled to the Soviet Union at a time when much of the Western world was fascinated by Stalin's grand economic experiment. The Soviet government presented an image of rapid industrial progress, modernisation, and prosperity, and many foreign visitors returned home praising what they believed to be the success of communism. Jones was not entirely convinced. Rather than limiting himself to carefully organised tours by Soviet officials, he slipped away from Moscow and travelled through the countryside of Ukraine. What he encountered there bore almost no resemblance to the image being presented to the outside world. As he moved from village to village, Jones found widespread starvation. People begged him for food. Families had exhausted their supplies months earlier. Entire communities appeared to be slowly wasting away as the state continued to seize grain and agricultural produce. Everywhere he went, he heard the same desperate phrase repeated over and over again: "There is no bread, we are dying." Jones later described seeing people whose bodies had been weakened to the point where they could barely stand. He witnessed empty farms, abandoned homes, and communities that seemed to be waiting for death. What he was seeing was the Holodomor, a catastrophic famine that killed millions across Soviet Ukraine. When Jones returned to Britain, he chose to publish exactly what he had witnessed. In newspaper articles and public statements, he warned that a terrible famine was taking place and that millions of Soviet citizens were starving while the Soviet government continued to deny that any crisis existed. The reaction was not what he expected. Instead of being widely praised, Jones found himself under attack. A number of influential journalists changed his claims, while others repeated Soviet assurances that reports of famine were exaggerated or completely false. Some governments preferred to maintain good relations with Moscow, and many observers simply found it difficult to believe that starvation on such a scale could be occurring in a modern European state. For a time, Gareth Jones stood almost alone, yet history would ultimately prove he had been right. The Soviet authorities never forgave Gareth Jones for what he had revealed. He was effectively barred from returning to the Soviet Union, and his name became deeply unpopular among those responsible for protecting Stalin's image abroad. 2 years later in 1935, Jones was travelling once again, this time in Japanese-controlled areas of China and Inner Mongolia. During the journey, he was kidnapped and held for ransom. Negotiations dragged on for days, but before an agreement could be reached, he was killed. He died just one day before his 30th birthday. Official investigations concluded that local bandits were responsible, and it was certainly possible that this was true. However, over the decades, historians have uncovered evidence suggesting that Soviet intelligence may have had connections to some of the people involved. While no definitive proof has ever emerged linking Joseph Stalin directly to the murder, the timing and circumstances have ensured that suspicions have never completely disappeared. Whether Gareth Jones was murdered on Stalin's orders, or simply became the victim of a dangerous region may never be known with certainty. What is known is that he was one of the very few journalists willing to risk his career, his reputation, and ultimately his life, in order to report what he believed to be the truth. At a time when many influential voices were repeating the Soviet versions of events, Jones chose to trust his own eyes instead. In the end, his greatest achievement was not exposing a famine, it was demonstrating what journalism is supposed to be. Because when millions of people were suffering in silence, Gareth Jones refused to look away.